What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. Just got out of seeing the new 3-hour cut of Caligula, now called Caligula, the Ultimate Cut. And this is going to be a tough one to review because we have the original film from the late 70s, which famously was a very troubled, kind of chaotic production and very controversial upon its initial release. And then we have all the behind-the-scenes insanity, which has been discussed and researched ad nauseum, but for a lot of people that will be new. And then we had this new cut of the movie, and so I guess my question for all of y'all, or my question for myself is, should I review the new movie, the old movie, or just try to speak about it in general terms and then kind of break down this video into the original film, the behind the scenes, and this new cut? Chances are I'm just going to be zigzagging all over the place, a little bit like a moth in front of a bug zapper, because it's going to be very tough to discuss certain ingredients in any of the cuts of the movie without then kind of careening off into other terrain, talking about some of the behind-the-scenes anecdotes and that sort of thing. But let's start with the basics. This is the story of Caligula, who became the emperor of Rome back in 37 AD, and he did not remain emperor for very long, but at the start of this movie, it's right before he becomes emperor. Tiberius Caesar is still in power, and this is basically a showcase for the talents of Malcolm McDowell. Malcolm McDowell had already done A Clockwork Orange and If a few years prior. This movie was shot in 1976, and he was really like on the cusp of becoming like this major superstar. And this whole movie is basically designed to kind of be a showcase for his talents. And one of the main reasons that there's been this huge effort to do the reconstruction of Caligula is that there was always this lingering feeling that there was like a hidden masterpiece inside the original version of Caligula, one which did a better job of kind of showing the emotional arc of the character of Caligula, like how he became so crazy, why he became so crazy, why he did all the things that he did. And we can debate the merits or lack thereof of the original cut, and we can debate the merits or lack thereof of this new cut, but the reality is, if you love Malcolm McDowell, well then this is a cause for celebration, because this is something that was very important to Malcolm McDowell over the years, and he always felt like the movie hadn't gotten its due, because famously it was recut at the last minute by its producer, Bob Guccione. And Bob Guccione was the publisher of Penthouse magazine. This was the most expensive independent film ever made. He kind of panicked at the last minute, thought the movie wasn't going to make its money back, and decided to add a few additional pornographic sequences. And the movie already had copious orgies and nudity and all that stuff, but Bob Guccione wanted to cover his bets and insert one particular, I won't even say outrageous scene, but very overtly sexual scene. And as a result, the movie kind of got roundly rejected or ridiculed upon its initial release due to the pornographic elements. And nowadays, I feel like people are much less prudish. I don't know if that original cut would have been pushed back upon quite as much as it was at that time. But because of the pornographic elements, nobody was willing to concede that John Gielgud and Peter O'Toole and Helen Mirren and all these actors were actually delivering really cool performances in this wild, out of control, just kind of runaway production. But getting back to the broad strokes of what this movie's about, it's primarily concerned with the relationship of Caligula with his sister Drusilla, played by Teresa Ann Savoy, the lovely Teresa Ann Savoy, as well as Caligula's relationship with his wife, played by Helen Mirren, who's famously playing the most promiscuous woman in all of Rome. And with these two women kind of at his side, he proceeds to embark upon a series of increasingly kind of erratic decisions leading up to his inevitable assassinations. Spoiler alert, if you don't know that Caligula was assassinated, he was only emperor for a couple of years before he was out, and his uncle, I think it's his uncle, anyway, Claudius was in. And if you want I guess a respectable or more sophisticated version of the story, I would always steer people toward the novel I, Claudius by Robert Graves, or the incredible TV show from the 1970s adapted from his book. Like, if you want to see world-class British talent, dramatizing the story of Caligula and what came after, that's what I would recommend. The appeal of Caligula has never been like historical accuracy or like the subtlety of the movie. It's always been about like just how excessive and insane and over the top it is. And if the goal of watching Caligula is to see like the wildest, craziest, most like obscene movie imaginable, maybe not the uncut version, because the uncut version is this version, which is like 2.5 hours long. Whoa, holy crap, I hit my whole camera. I'm getting too excited. But if your goal is to see like the craziest version of Caligula that is out there, maybe the ultimate cut is not the place to start. But if what your goal is you want to see the best performance by Malcolm McDowell possible and the best performance by Helen Mirren, well then the ultimate cut is the one you're going to want to start with. Once again, the uncut version is the insane one. The ultimate version is the one with better acting. I think there's certain advantages and disadvantages to both cuts, but if you're interested in Caligula, well then you should just watch both, do the compare and contrast, and that's what's fun about it. feel like film history, or like when people get like movie crazy, a huge part of the appeal is not just like watching the best version of a movie out there, but discussing the history of production, what led to the different cuts, and kind of getting like absorbed by the entire narrative. Because the reality is, I'm not the world's biggest admirer of either version of Caligula, but I'm fascinated by the story of the making of Caligula. And so if you're fascinated by the making of Caligula in this crazy fucking movie, like the fact that I got to see it in the theater in 2024 in a packed house, that alone is just insane. Which is why I said at the beginning, it's kind of an interesting movie to review, because you're not just reviewing the movie on its own objective terms. This is just the latest chapter in an ongoing story that started back in 1976 when Bob Guccione had the idea of making this movie. I guess even a little earlier, when Gore Vidal decided to write it. I mean, Gore Vidal famously distanced himself from the production pretty early on, and the director Tinto Brass, like when basically there's this giant pissing contest behind the scenes, director Tinto Brass said, if Gore Vidal continues to kind of combat me over my my version of the movie, I'm just going to publish his screenplay and let everybody see just how deeply flawed it was. But the reality is, neither Gore Vidal nor director Tinto Brass was happy with the final product of the movie, and they kind of ran screaming for cover. Pretty much everyone ran screaming for cover. And I don't know if the actors would have felt as compelled to do so if there hadn't been this giant public outcry, because according to an interview which I listened to recently with Malcolm McDowell, the interview hosted by Gilbert Gottfried, and thanks to Chichi Latte over on Twitter, I heard part 2 of this interview where Malcolm McDowell shared a few anecdotes about the behind the scenes and the release and what came after. But one of the best anecdotes that Malcolm McDowell shares is how he bumped into John Gielgud by chance on the street during the initial release of the film and the initial controversy, and everybody's freaking out, and people are describing it as like a moral holocaust. And people were losing their minds over how outrageous the original movie was. But John Gielgud apparently was totally unaware of the controversy, because he saw Malcolm McDowell and said, "Oh, like, have you been to see Caligula yet in the theater? I've seen it 3 times, two times of which I paid for it. I think it's frightfully good." And Malcolm McDowell was like, "Really? You think it's frightfully good?" Anyway, it's hilarious that John Gielgud was kind of like totally unaware of the fact that there's this giant storm brewing around the movie, and people, clutching their pearls and saying, "Shame on you," and blah, blah, blah. And once again, like in 2024, when you see the pornographic scenes that were inserted into the movie by Bob Guccione after the fact, they're pretty tame and pretty chaste by contemporary standards. I think the big thing that people were freaking out about is that in the quote-unquote uncut version, which I have, which is 2.5 hours long, there are a lot of fully engorged erect penises on display throughout the movie, and people, having a wank or having sex or getting blowjobs and blah, blah, blah. Like, so much so that when my buddies and I were 18 and first watched it on VHS, like, there's so many guys just jacking off like in the first 20 minutes. We're like, maybe we don't want to watch this right now. So it took me a long time to kind of circle back to the movie. So I guess, once again, like the erect penis is like the final frontier in terms of like the big taboo in cinema. Like when you watch a show on Amazon or a show on HBO or whatever, like they're more than happy to show tiny, shriveled up, like really cold, flaccid penises. And what's so pathetic is how you can sense these filmmakers working for HBO and Amazon think they're being so transgressive and shocking by showing these tiny little penises. But a fully engorged, oiled up penis is more or less the final frontier when it comes to taboo in film and television. So if you find those kinds of images to be a distraction, well, then you're going to want to watch the ultimate cut. And if you, want to see all the pornographic ingredients, then you're going to want to watch the quote-unquote uncut version of the movie. And I think there's strengths and weaknesses to both cuts. And thankfully, at the beginning of the screening tonight, Tim League himself, who is the co-founder of the Alamo Drafthouse Cinema, as well as Drafthouse Films, which is distributing the movie, he's also the co-founder of Fantastic Fest. He also co-founded Neon. He's no longer involved with Neon, but that's a major distribution company. Tim League is a fucking legend when it comes to being an entrepreneurial figure within the world of movies. But he conducted a little interview with the reconstructor of the film, Thomas Negovan, and they basically, without going into too much detail, they tried to make us aware of like what was the main reason why they wanted to put this reconstruction together in the first place. And according to Negovan, it was an attempt to honor the original intentions of the filmmaker. And it should be said that Thomas Negovan was born in 1971. He was a small child when they were making this movie, so he was not involved. But he's basically trying to honor the original intentions of Gore Vidal, who hated everything about the movie. He's trying to honor the original intentions of Tinto Brass, who, for whatever reason, was not invited to participate in this ultimate cut. So it's not a director's cut. It's a reconstruction. But it seems weird to me that Thomas Negovan would try to reconstruct the movie without the input of the filmmaker. But anyway, I don't know what went down in terms of the behind the scenes between the two of them, to what extent they may have spoken. I just know that Tinto Brass said something publicly about how it was weird that he was not more involved with this latest cut of the film, but it seemed like Negovan, what he really wanted to do with this movie was show all the additional footage with Malcolm McDowell and Helen Mirren that was left on the cutting room floor back in the late 70s, because there is some really good stuff. And famously, Malcolm McDowell and Helen Mirren were really good friends. And Helen Mirren was the only person associated with the movie that didn't really seem to be that concerned with the controversy. She has this great quote, which I discovered through Mark Kermode, where she said say what you will about Caligula, but it has an irresistible blend of art and genitals. And I feel like that's the best way to describe it, an irresistible blend of art and genitals. And I don't completely buy the idea that there was like some lost masterpiece kind of tucked away, left on the editing room floor that needed to be kind of rediscovered and reconstructed. It's just a new version of the movie with a greater emphasis on performances and less of an emphasis on the pornographic ingredients. Although, it should be said, there's still abundant nudity from start to finish. Just the most extreme scenes, those are gone. But there'll be plenty of people, myself included, who will cry foul at the removal or the omission of one scene involving Teresa and Savoy, because in the context of the original cut, it doesn't feel like a porn scene that was inserted by Bob Guccione. I shouldn't say inserted. That sounds maybe a little too much of a double entendre, but there's one scene with Teresa and Savoy, her famous death scene after she caught a fever from Caligula, after looking after Caligula, where as she's dying, Caligula kind of undresses her and he's kissing her all over because he basically wants to have sex with his sister one last time, and he can't bear to live without her. But for whatever reason, that scene's been condensed and it just cuts to where he's carrying her around the palace, screaming, shrieking to the heavens, and that image has been used on one of the versions of the poster. But I don't know why they would remove that scene with Teresa and Savoy, because it's a pretty chaste scene relative or compared to some of the more outrageous scenes, like the famous sex scene involving Anika de Lorenzo and Lori Wagner, which, to be fair, as far as porn is concerned, still lovingly photographed and very well put together and very well produced. It was just shot after basically the entire film had wrapped, concluded, and Bob Guccione got together a skeleton crew just to do that one scene. Basically, in the scene where Caligula is having a three-way with his sister and his wife, in the uncut version of the movie, these two girls are watching through a peephole and decide to have their own little sex scene to kind of intercut with the other one, whereas in the new version, the ultimate cut, it just focuses on the three-ways. Once again, there's plenty of sex in this movie, just not as much as people might remember from earlier versions of the movie. But getting back to producer Thomas Negovan and his intentions with this reconstruction, he definitely has the best of intentions. He's been working on this giant Kickstarter campaign for a book about the making of. I backed that book years ago, but for whatever reason, still hasn't come out yet. But I think he's been juggling a lot of flaming batons trying to get this version of the movie ready. And there is some new stuff. There's a new score by Troy Sterling Nyes, if I'm saying his name correctly, as well as a new animated title sequence by Dave McKean. And Dave McKean, I've read a ton of his comics, very talented artist. It's a little weird for me, though, when you hear a brand new score that sounds really clean and you're looking at animation that looks really clean. When you're trying to match it with a movie that was shot almost half a century ago, they just seem to clash. I always find it very difficult for anybody to go back and add additional stuff to an older movie because your mind just rejects the new footage in comparison to the old. But once you get 5 minutes into the movie, you stop noticing the new score. I'd say the new score is fine. I actually didn't mind the original score, because the original score from way back in the day, it borrowed little ingredients from people like Prokofiev, very famous Russian composer, or it also borrowed from Spartacus and things like that. And like Drusilla's death scene has certain music in the original version, which when I think of Caligula, I think of that music first and foremost. And in the absence of that score, it's just a very different experience. So once again, there are pluses and minuses to both versions. So I guess what you have to do is sit down for a 5.5 hour double feature to watch the uncut version of the movie and the ultimate cut of the movie back to back. But in spite of being 30 minutes longer, there's some non-sex scenes that the Ultimate Cut chooses to leave out. Like famously, there's a scene in the uncut version of the movie where Malcolm McDowell's character is talking to John Gielgud as he dies, after he's committing suicide, and he's asking him like which gods are you seeing? What is death like? It's actually kind of a cool little interaction between those two actors. For whatever reason, that hit the cutting room floor in this new version of the movie. Not entirely sure why. And then it also moves some things around, like when Teresa Ann Savoy and Malcolm McDowell are kind of frolicking through the woods, almost like young gazelles, like, in a state of like half undressed. That's been pushed like 2/3 of the way into the movie when they're out on this like picnic. And that kind of works. Like the movie has a much like kind of stronger, much more dynamic, kind of aggressive opening, and introduces the character of Tiberius much earlier. And Tiberius, played by Peter O'Toole, so gross and so unsavory. When you watch this, you have to remember he'd shot Lawrence of Arabia only like 12 years earlier. And Lawrence of Arabia, young, gorgeous, beautiful. Like no man has ever been more attractive on film than Peter O'Toole in Lawrence of Arabia. But for the character of Tiberius, he's like covered in all these gross sores and sagging skin, and like he's rotting from all these STDs. I mean, he's all fucked up. But I think this whole, no matter which cut of the movie you watch, it's totally worth watching to see Peter O'Toole in action. It's totally worth it to see John Gielgud in action. And it's absolutely worth it to see Helen Mirren and Malcolm McDowell in action. And speaking of Helen Mirren, I should add that in that interview with Malcolm McDowell and Gilbert Gottfried, at the very end of part 2, he adds, I won't spoil it, but he adds one really hilarious but also kind of semi-grotesque anecdote about John Gielgud and Helen Mirren. And the way he imitates it, I mean, I had to basically press stop on my iPad. I was like on the floor, curled up in a ball, laughing so fucking hard. Fantastic stuff. And I think that's what keeps people coming back to this movie, is that there's so much insanity behind the scenes to discuss, in addition to all the crazy fucking shit that you're going to see on the big screen. Because this movie is not trying to be some sort of gritty, authentic recreation of Rome at that time. It's got some shit that, like, never in a million years would I've expected to see it anywhere in any movie. Like, there's a scene in the Colosseum at one point where traitors to Rome are all buried up to their necks and their heads are just sticking out. And everybody in the stands just started throwing fruit, rotten vegetables, men, women, young and old, doesn't matter. Like, everybody's just throwing fruit at these traitors. And at one end of the stadium, there's this giant red wall covered in soldiers that's slowly moving forward. And at the base of it has all these spinning blades. And as the spinning blades come into contact with people's heads sticking out of the ground, the heads go flying. But it's like the most ridiculous, over-the-top contraption you've ever seen. But that's part of like, I guess that's part of like the main selling point of this movie is like the complete and total outrageous excess of it. Like every opportunity they have to be completely over-the-top and unrealistic, they seize it. And that's what makes the movie, like you'll never be bored while watching it. I can't claim that it's going to enrich your soul or that's going to make you more enlightened or give you a deeper appreciation of history, but you will never be bored. You will always be entertained, and perhaps maybe you'll even be shocked. But once again, I've lost the ability to be shocked by pretty much any movie, so I've got a lot of emotional scar tissue from watching a lot of fucked up movies. I honestly don't find the uncut version of Caligula to be all that shocking, but back in 1980, people felt otherwise. And so when you hear about critics at the time describing the movie as a moral holocaust, I'm like, you know what? Get over yourself, relax. Like, there are actually real problems in the world, or you could have stomach cancer. Like, there are other, like, legitimate things you could worry about. Maybe chill out on your rhetoric when it comes to this movie, because from my point of view, when it comes to the orgies and the nudity and all the just like like the bestiality and like the perversions and the mutations, like every form of sex that you can possibly imagine is on display for like 3 straight hours. I get completely numb to it after about 30 minutes. Like there comes a point in the movie where they have this giant orgy where they're basically pimping out all the wives of all the senators in order to raise money to invade Britain. And by the time you get to that scene and you're just watching hundreds of people doing God knows what all over the place, it's like you might as well just be looking at random crowd shots or like a random shot of nature. Like you get completely accustomed to just the glorious excess of it. So I don't find the movie to be really shocking at all, but maybe that just means I've watched one too many movies if I can't really get like my pulse raised by this kind of I can't even say the word, megalomaniacal filmmaking that Tinto Brass was indulging in. And as far as what Tinto Brass's original intentions with the film might have been, who the hell knows? Because according to Bob Guccione, Tinto Brass shot enough footage to basically make 50 different movies. Like he said, here's the exact quote. He said he shot enough film to make the original version of Ben-Hur about 50 times over. So there was a lot of spare material out there, but Tinto Brasso is mostly known for doing kind of softcore erotic films. Like Teresa Ann Savoy had worked with him previously on a movie called Salon Kitty, which is how she got cast in this movie. And I've seen a handful of Tinto Brasso movies. Like the only one that I own, actually, well, apart from Caligula, I also own Ferma Posta Tinto Brasso, which came out in the 90s, which is actually kind of a saucy little softcore erotic movie where basically he's sitting in an office receiving letters and people are describing like weird little sexual encounters they've had, and then he'll show a little short film kind of bringing it to life. But he also made, hang on, I've got a list of the movies by him that I have seen. I wrote it down earlier, and of course I've lost it. The Key, Cheeky, which came out in 2000, which I like. All Ladies Do It. And that might be it as far as my knowledge of Tinto Brasso is concerned. But he's made shitloads of movies, and he's one of those directors where, like, I feel like if you've seen a handful of his movies, maybe you kind of have a good idea of like what his style is. But if you like softcore movies with a touch of class or a little artistry, he will definitely be right up your alley. He's one of those directors who's been incredibly active over the last half century, and I owe it to myself to watch more of his movies. But what else can we say about this flick? I guess what I find most interesting about this new Ultimate Cut is that it involves so many people who just seem to be the world's biggest film fanatics. Like just in his introduction, before Tim League started talking to the Reconstructor, he was talking about all the trailers we had seen prior to the interview. We'd seen trailers for the horror movie The Substance, and we'd also seen the trailer for Honora. And just seeing Tim League, who's in his 50s now, he's been involved in the movie industry for many decades, has many accomplishments to his name. He's sitting there with like a half-empty beer in his hand, and to see him talking with so much excitement and enthusiasm about movies that are still coming out, he clearly is a guy who's just absolutely in love with the filmmaking process, the history of film, dusting off and rediscovering old movies, giving movies a second life, or just distributing old movies and that sort of thing. He's one of those guys where just like he lives and breathes and shits movies all day, every day. But like when I think about all the cool movies that have been rediscovered over the years due to Drafthouse Films, or all the great movie-going experiences that I've had at the Alamo Drafthouse, I owe Tim League a huge debt of gratitude. And as he was leaving the theater, I tried to give him a little like salute, make eye contact with him, but he just breezed right on by me. He didn't notice me, but in his defense, the lights were going down and the movie was about to start. So I'm thrilled that this movie got made. I'm thrilled that this movie got reassembled. And if it gets people interested in talking about movie history and like the crazy fucking behind the scenes and the advantages and disadvantages of the different cuts, for me, that's what film history is all about. Like for me, there's no separating the great movies of the past with the great stories about how those movies came to be. They've always been totally interwoven. I know there are plenty of people out there who are happy just to watch the movies, go out and have a drink, have dinner, talk about it, and move on with their lives. But if you're obsessed with old movies, then you're eventually going to become obsessed by certain filmmakers and the ups and downs of their career. And I won't claim to be obsessed with anybody involved in Caligula, but I just love just like the shock value and the controversy, and how the controversy inadvertently became this like accidental giant marketing campaign where the movie has just lived in infamy ever since. I mean, just by reputation alone, I knew about this movie in the late 80s and early 90s, long before my friends and I ever dared to rent it. It was just, considered totally radioactive. Like when the film got imported to the U.S., people were seizing the film in different states and declaring it obscene. And I'm reading here that Penthouse had to take legal action. And on one hand, he thought that the controversies would give the movie some great marketing, but on the other hand, he didn't want the movie to get seized when they tried to play it in certain states, like I think it was Massachusetts where the movie got banned initially. Yeah, I'm reading here, in Boston, authorities seized the film and Penthouse had to take legal action. So all these controversies just lived on and on. But for my money, the art of cinema would be a very, very boring thing if it didn't occasionally take a big, giant risk with a scandalous, kind of outrageous and shocking and, morally objectionable movie like Caligula. Because even back in like the 1920s and 1930s, you'd see the occasional movie where like, wait a second, like this movie, like Sign of the Cross by Cecil B. DeMille, which has a different Roman Colosseum scene with like alligators eating women. Like there's a hint of like a monkey maybe having sex with a woman. Like there's all sorts of crazy shit now. What we call a pre-code movie. So this is not like exclusive to the 1970s. Filmmakers have always been kind of seeing what they can get away with and introducing a little bit of shock value in order to get people excited, get people talking. And I feel like people love to be shocked. People love to be outraged. Like people love to go to their backyard and lean on the fence and say to their neighbor, like, did you hear about such and such? I am shocked. I am outraged. I am appalled. Even if a part of them is kind of secretly turned on by or tantalized by the decadent pleasures offered by a movie like Caligula. And I think that's where the appeal for Caligula really is. If you enjoy watching movies that very willfully and very provocatively step over the lines of what would be considered good taste or conventional taste, well, then you absolutely need to see Caligula. And I wish more movies like this would get made. Apparently, Francis Ford Coppola's new movie, Megalopolis, has some pretty outrageous stuff in there. I don't know if it'll be as outrageous as some of the more excessive scenes in Caligula, but we do need the occasional outrageous movie. Otherwise, film just becomes content. If it's nothing but PG-13 franchises, movies would just get so goddamn boring, so predictable, so lifeless. You need to shock people out of their complacency from time to time, just to remind people that film has the capacity to be like a lightning bolt being thrown right into the middle of your soul. Like when a movie like Blue Velvet comes along in the 1980s and shocks people, or a more recent movie like Blue is the Warmest Color, which is a full-blown, legit kind of art house movie that also happens to feature like full-blown hardcore pornography for like 20-30 minutes in the middle of the movie. And I have absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. So during a time where outrageous movies are increasingly hard to find, especially during the summer movie season where it's all about popcorn movies, roller coaster movies, big franchise movies, if you're looking for a full-blown palate cleanser with a little lesson in film history, then you should absolutely hunt down at least a version of Caligula. I'll leave it up to you to decide. Do you want the more excessive version, or do you want the more kind of subtle, nuanced version? And you really can't go wrong with either. But I'm not going to make a claim that either movie is like some great unsung masterpiece, but there's a part of me that will always find these big, spectacular failures much more interesting and much more entertaining than a more kind of polished movie or a more respectable movie. Like if a movie wins 7 Oscars, great, that's wonderful, but is it still going to be talked about many years later? Like if you look at the history of the Oscars, there's a lot of bland, forgettable, kind of geriatric, safe entertainment in there that nobody talks about and nobody remembers. But here we are, 2024. People are still talking about Caligula. So I guess my hope is that there's still some people out there, like young versions of Tinto Brass or Bob Guccione, who are willing to roll the dice. And I hope that there are actors out there like Helen Mirren, who with like kind of like a wink and a big smile on her face, will gleefully hurl ourselves into movies like this. Helen Mirren is just an international treasure and has been making great stuff since the late 60s. And I love the fact that she has never backed down and never felt the need to apologize for her role in Caligula. You know, I get the sense that she's got a very healthy, zesty interest in the physical act of love. But maybe before I get totally derailed by my love and affection for the great Helen Mirren, maybe I ought to wrap up this video because I got to get up relatively early tomorrow and go see Alien Romulus, which I'm looking forward to reviewing. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of change of pace for the channel. It's not every day that you get to review a 45-year-old, kind of sort of art house / pornographic, big budget epic spectacle like Caligula. Never in a million years did I think I would be in a packed auditorium watching this movie, and it is very different watching it with a crowd than it is watching it at home. There's one scene, probably the most shocking and controversial scene of the movie, where Caligula decides to exercise his rights as emperor by basically raping a husband and wife on their wedding day. Like that scene, there were people getting up and leaving the theater. I could tell people were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. It's definitely a different experience seeing it with the crowd. So if you have a theater nearby if you have a theater near you playing this flick, probably an Alamo Drafthouse, I strongly recommend you get a bunch of your friends and go check it out. But once again, drink your coffee. It's a 3-hour movie. It's a bit of an endurance test to sit through it in its entirety, but I'm glad I did. But on that note, I'm going to wrap up this video. Hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it vaguely interesting or excited your curiosity in some way, shape, or form. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.